Shalom, everyone. It's Keisha Gallagher again with Grace and Torah, graceandtorah.net, and it is the new moon of the 13th month, the second Adar, or Adar B. Last month in Adar 1, I talked a lot about Adar just in general, and the attributes, and the tribe, and the mazel, and all those things that are associated with it. So since we are in a pregnant year, and we do have an additional month, nearly 30 days with Adar, I thought that this time I would do some connections with Passover. And I talked about the leap year and explained it all in that first video. And this is Han, by the way. Say hi, Han. So if you have questions about that or want to know more about the leap year, watch the video from last month. With Purim being in this month, and that is all given to us in the book of Esther, which we're going to go through, we're going to look at why the rabbis want to connect the redemption that happened in the time of Esther with the redemption of Passover, and why the additional month of the leap year is actually that first month of Adar and not the second one. And then we'll talk about some of the warfare and things that go on at this time, and how Purim actually informs us of some great strategy there. So I've been titling this one, obviously, the new moon of the Adar second, but also revealing the concealed, because that is what this month is all about. That is what the book of Esther is all about. So there's something hidden at this season that is on the brink of being revealed. We talked about it being a pregnant month and how that's associated with birth. And so I want you to think of it that way. Think of this being the end of a cycle, but also the beginning, because the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. And I'm going to have to get rid of my little kitty cat. He is definitely not in nap mode right now like they usually are. So let's bless the Creator for the month to start before we get into it. Adonai, may it be your will, our God and the God of our forefathers, to renew for us Adar the second, for good and for blessing. Grant us a long life, a life of peace, a life of goodness, a life of blessing, a life in which we earn a livelihood, a life of physical vigor, a life that reflects reverence for Hashem and dread of sin, a life that is free from shame and disgrace, a life of wealth and honor, a life in which a love of Torah and an awe of heaven shall be within us, a life in which the desires of our heart shall be fulfilled for good. Amen. May he who performed miracles for our forefathers and redeemed them from slavery to freedom, may he soon redeem us and gather our dispersed from the four corners of the earth. For all Israel is united in fellowship, and let us say, Amen. Before we get into Purim and those connections with Passover, I wanted to talk about the duality of the year. I want you to imagine the earth as a sphere, and it having that axis, those two poles, from the North Pole and the South Pole. The year, the Jewish year, the biblical year, is very much like these two poles on the sphere. And we know that God's time is not linear, it is cyclical. So this is a very good analogy to think about. So each end of that pole can easily be viewed as the beginning, or the end, or the beginning of a cycle. And our journey throughout every day and every month, and especially every year, is very much like the two sides of this pole. We have one that runs from Tishrei to Elul, and that would be the accounting of the years. But we also have one that runs from Nisan to Adar. So we are at the end of the cycle for the months. And so I want you to think about experiencing Adonai and his Moedim, his calendar, with these two things in mind, these 2 points. They are not, although they are polar opposites, they're not in competition with one another. They work together. So there is a head of months, Rosh Chodeshim, and there's a head of years, Rosh Hashanah. And in Western thought, I think that we want these cycles to be one thing, and they're not one thing. We have multiple cycles working in Adonai's calendar. And although they are separate, they are interwoven, but we've got to be able to broaden our thinking on this, because the tendency is if we want to force them into being one thing, then we are in conflict, first off, with Jewish understanding, and therefore often we don't understand why they do the things they do, or really what it is we are in conflict with biblical reckoning, Hebraic type of thinking. And so although we might want to associate it just with tradition, I encourage you to sort of open your mind and think, maybe there's more going on here than what I can see in my finite mind. Because the years are not months and the months are not years, yet they both work together to give us the fullness of the calendar of Adonai. So they are reckoning two different things. So it makes sense that they each would have their own type of head. If this is true, and I believe it is, Esther, the book of Esther, Purim, the month of Adar, this last month is the end of the cycle. And so it has something to teach us not only about the end, but the beginning, because we're not talking about a linear line. We're talking about a cycle. So the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. So there's something that Purim has to teach us about the last days. And we often think about the end of days being associated with Sukkot, and that's true. It's just on a different cycle. But on the cycle of the months, this is also true for Purim. They're not in conflict with one another. So I thought we would begin by talking about the word Megillah. You will see the word Megillah in reference to the scroll or the roll of Esther. One year I bought this little guy right here. You can find lots of little scrolls for Esther because the book is read usually corporately, very interactively, where you are, yaying for Mordecai, booing, and blotting out Haman's name. But this one is something that I got on eBay, and it's a little scroll. It's not on, anything special like parchment. It is on paper. But let's see if I can roll it out where you can see it. Let me get it together there. There we go. You have the Hebrew, and then you have the English, and you can actually roll this whole thing out. This is a Megillah. Now, the Megillah is Strong's number H4039, and it means a roll. You might think of Psalm 40, where we're told that, lo, in the volume of the scroll, it is written of me. That word for volume is the word roll. And some of them might even say roll. It is written of me. But notice how it is something that is cylinder-like. It's also can be thought of as a circle, because if you look at it from this side, it's a circle. If you look at it from this way, it's a cylinder. But it's something that's rolled up. And the root for this word Megillah is galal. That's Strong's 1556. And again, it's the verbal root, and it means it's the action of rolling. It can even mean to remove. Like you'll see an instance of this where Jacob, when he first goes to his relatives, before he meets Leah and Rachel, there is a stone over the well. And he rolls away the stone so that the cattle can get water. And that rolling away is enabling them to, of course, take drink. And we're going to go into some other related terms, which are just fascinating with this. But before we get off the topic of the scroll, in Judaism and tradition, there are Chamesh Megillot. There's 5 Megillas, and they are read at specific times of the year. You have the Song of Solomon, which is read at Pesach. You have Ruth, that's read at Shavuot, Pentecost. You have Lamentations, that is read on Tish B'Av, or the 9th of Av. You have Ecclesiastes, that's read at Sukkot. And of course, in Adar, with Purim, you have the book of Esther. And so when you're talking about the Megillah, the most obvious one is usually Esther. It's a Megillat Esther. So I'm going to read some scriptures that use this word Megillah in its root, or galal, which means to roll away. In Joshua 5:9, it says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. Psalms 42:7, "Deep calls to deep at the sound of your waterfalls. All your breakers, your waves, gal, which is the root, have rolled over me." And this is the psalm that begins with the deer panting for water. It's very nicely tied in with the tribe for our month, Naphtali. And Naphtali, it has beautiful words. They have like a prophetic pen. So the deep calling the deep and the waterfalls of Adonai. It is both a wonderful thing, yet a heavy, heavy burden. Isaiah 34:4-5. "And all the host of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts will also wither away as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree. For my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom." Now, who is Edom? That's Esau. Remember that dichotomy that we have between Jacob and Esau? And a later relative of Esau is Amalek, and Haman is a descendant from them. "And upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction." So, words that are associated with this term. You have Galil, or the Galilee. The Galilee is like a big circular lake, the Kinneret, but also that's dotted, with little cities all around it, or towns. And we see Yeshua even making this circuit, this circle all around the Galilee. We have Gilgal being a wheel. Think of a wheel in the middle of a wheel, the rolling aspect of it, or on a chariot's wheel. We have it translated sometimes as a whirlwind. See the circular circuit moving of a whirlwind. But we also have this term, Golgotha, or Calvary, the place of the skull. Why? Because your head is round, your skull, your head is round, your skull is round. And this is the place that Messiah was crucified, on the tree. We have this same word being used when they would take census and they're counting heads, skulls, if you will, when they were given the manna and they were to gather an omer per head. It's like, again, per skull. And so this would be a neat blog post to really go into detail, but I'm not going to go much more into that other than just thinking about what happens when you unroll a scroll. To unroll a scroll is to reveal the instruction or the message inside. And we have the book of Revelation in Hebrew is Hitgalut. Galut, you hear it? And it is what? The revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach. So obviously something is being revealed. We even have scrolls. Remember the 7 scrolls that are mentioned within that prophetic book. So to roll something away is to uncover it. It's to reveal. Even the exile, you'll often see in Jewish writings when they're talking about the diaspora, they call it the galut, or even the coming redemption, geula. So all these things are related. So what is actually being revealed? We want to go back to streamline this down to this month, to Adar, to Purim. In the book of Esther, we have something that is being revealed. There's something hidden and there's something revealed. So really the confrontation that we see between Mordecai and Haman is just a retelling of the old enmity between, like we could go back to King Saul. Remember when he was supposed to utterly destroy the Amalekites and he didn't? He kept the head, King Agag, and he didn't destroy him. And because of that, he lost his kingship over this. So we see a Benjamite, Saul, dealing with a descendant of Amalek, which is King Agag, and we see a failure going on there. But notice Mordecai is also from Benjamin, and then we have Haman, who is an Agite. He's an Amalekite. So if we can take this even further back on a spiritual level and look at the battle that happened between Amalek and Israel. Remember, the first time doubt creeped up into their mind, is when Amalek came and attacked. And I have several articles on this called Warring with Amalek that bring some of this stuff out. I encourage you to read them. But we can even take it back further. We can go back to the battle between the twins, Jacob and Esau. And I bring those up all the time because it's vital to our understanding. But even before then, back from that root story, we can go back even further. And we can go back to two trees in the garden and the difference that is between them. And that's what I hope to bring out here. Because what is actually being revealed in Esther? What is being revealed when a scroll is unrolled? What is, the revelation that we're supposed to see here? Well, obviously, we see the Son of Man being revealed, but what we also see when he is revealed, that the man of sin is revealed. And so I'm hoping to enlarge your understanding in that area. So we need to roll away the stone. When Messiah rose from the grave, this is in Mark 16, 3-7, they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large. And basically they're told, he is risen. He's not here. But he's going ahead of you to the Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. So I thought we would look at Esther from a different perspective. Last year, I wrote a post on costumes and is it okay for us to do that at Purim? And what do costumes have to do with the book of Esther? What do they have to do with Purim? And actually, I take you back to these same stories, but I essentially told the story of Esther through garments, because garments are a type of costume. And that was really enlightening to me. But this year, what stood out to me is that when we go through the book of Esther, there's a lot of hidden, they're not as obvious, of course, as the garments that are in the story, but there's a lot of hidden hints to trees. So I thought that I would tell the story of Esther through the symbols of trees, because trees are people. And I thought I would open this up with a rather lengthy passage from Luke 21, 25 through 22:1. I want you to listen to the idioms, what is being told to us in this passage. There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars and on the earth, dismay among the nations, and perplexity at the roaring of the sea. Notice we're talking about end-time events. We're talking about the nations being unsettled. We're talking about the roaring of the sea, which is another idiom for the nations if you watched Adar 1's video. And the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And I read a passage to you from the prophets that talked about that, with the skies being rolled up like a scroll. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up. Lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. And I know if you are like me and you are looking at what is happening in our culture, you cannot even watch the news for 5 minutes without seeing utter chaos. It is just so fleshly and so immoral, all the things that are taking place, that it is almost unbelievable. It's like watching a movie. But Messiah says, don't fret over this. Don't get in fear. Look up. Your redemption is drawing near. And he goes on to say, in verse 29, then he told them a parable. Behold, the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put forth leaves, you see it and know for yourselves that summer is now near. Okay, so I want you to think about that for a second. Trees. What is he talking about? He's talking about the fig tree of like Israel and all trees, all nations. This is involving the whole world. So you also, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. He's basically just repeated the same thing he just did in the earlier passages. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard, so that your hearts will not be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of life, and that day will not come on you suddenly like a trap. When you're looking and scrolling through social media, when you are watching the news, when you are looking at all the appalling things that are actually occurring in this once Christian nation, don't get in fear. Don't get in worry. and don't let it become a snare and a trap for you, for it will come upon all those who dwell on the face of the earth. He says, but keep on the alert at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are about to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. Now, during the day, he was teaching in the temple, but at evening, he would go out and spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet, the Mount of Olives. And all the people would get up early in the morning to come to him in the temple to listen to him. May we be those people. And then as sort of the chapter ends there, but it's connected to the next chapter. Remember, there weren't chapter breaks in the actual ancient text. And it says, now the feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching. So notice this message was given in this season. Now, could it have been the first part of Nisan? Of course. But we're still right on that cusp because we're in that last 13th month. So the season is still here. This message is seasonal in his cycle. Remember, even prophecy is not linear. It is cyclical. Things happen again and again and again. They are multidimensional and multi-layered. And if we fail to recognize that, we'll fail to miss the message. This is true every year, not just right now. So let's talk about the names, because this is how we're going to learn about the trees in Esther. In Persian, Esther means star. It is a cognate to the pagan deity Ishtar, Ashtaroth, or Easter. And that scares people. It actually, a lot of people don't like it. As a matter of fact, some of them don't even like the fact that the book of Esther is in our Bibles because of these pagan names. But anyway, I want you to pay attention because Mordecai's name is equally pagan. It is akin to Marduk, the patron god of the city of Babylon. So on the surface, and in our ignorance or rashness, we might want to write the story off. We might want to just discard with the pagan names like we do with everything else. But that is not what the story is asking us to do. These were recorded in Holy Writ for a reason. So if there's not an idle word in the scripture, that includes the use of these names in this story. They are meant to teach us something. But if we fail to even want to use them, then we're going to miss some deeper truths. So don't get offended. Offense is the bait that's in the trap of the enemy, so don't fall for it. Look deeper. While Esther is certainly a very common Persian pagan name, that sound, Esther, on the ears of a Hebrew would convey something much different. Instead of being a star, the root of Esther in Hebrew is Hester, hidden. There are hidden things in this story if we have eyes to see or ears to hear. So the root is satar, which is a Samic, a tav, and a resh, and it means to hide or conceal. It has derivatives that mean a hiding place. So there is something with Esther and this story that is hidden. It's hidden from plain sight. And maybe it is to weed out those who just don't want to give it mind or who want to read things into the text that aren't there. So do we have a precedent for this in the Torah? Well, the rabbis believe that we do. Since the Hebrew word for hide is Esther or Hester, they believe the allusion is found in Deuteronomy 32:20. Now, this chapter is a very prophetic book. It is the song of Moses. It is the song that is a witness against the children who are going to become disobedient. And it says in that passage in verse 20, then he said, I will hide my face from them. And this is our root, Hester. And I will see what their end shall be, for they are a perverse generation, sons in whom is no faithfulness. Could we say that might have been true in the day of Esther? We could. Could we say that's true in our day? Yes, we can. So the costumes and masks of Purim are all designed to underscore the essential hiddenness of this day, this time, and this season. We're meant to be like Naphtali. We're meant to wrestle with the many polarities, right? You saw that image that I shared about the two poles. Which one is right? It's not which one, it's yes. So can you struggle with the polarities that are in Esther? Can you wrestle with them and allow Adonai to change your walk forever? That's always the question. So the whole Megillat Esther could, because of the meaning of Esther in Hebrew, could easily be translated as the revealing of the hidden. But if we're hung up on what we consider something pagan, we're not going to get the message. It will remain closed. The scroll will remain rolled up. But I encourage you to look behind the mask, to unroll the scroll. So in Hebrew, Esther does have a name. It's Hadassah. And this is a beautiful name. It is actually the myrtle branch. And the myrtle branch is one of the goodly trees that are waved at the festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Nations. So this was her hidden name. This was her real name. This was her godly name. But just as her nationality and just as Hashem, God himself, was hidden in the story of exile, and it is a story of exile, Galut, it is a story that is much like all of our stories. Her identity is concealed even from her husband, the king of Persia, but it will be revealed in God's timing and for his purposes. So I'm going to read a quote to you. Dr. Halise Alwine has a small booklet and a video series that's really an extension of her workbook for the Scarlet Harlot and the Crimson Thread that's all about Esther. And it's called Esther's Mysteries Behind the Mask. Dr. Halise Alwine. You can find it at thecreationgospel.com. And this is just a quote that she writes in the introduction. This one's small print for me, so I'm going to have to put on my glasses. And she says, although Esther puts on the mask of a Persian name, her Hebrew name is Hadassah, which means a myrtle tree. Myrtle is one of the leafy branches that is waved toward the four corners of the earth in the lulav during the Feast of Sukkot. Esther's very name hints at Sukkot, and her status as an orphan and an alien in Persian exile also hint to Sukkot. And the reason why, and this is me speaking now, is because what are we supposed to do with the pilgrimage feast? We are always to take care of the marginalized groups, right? The orphans and the widows and the Levites and the poor. So picking back up, quoting her, Sukkot is an appointed time to welcome and do good to the stranger, alien, orphan, and widow. The 70 years of exile in Babylon allotted to Judah also allude to Sukkot, the Feast of Nations, when 70 bulls were offered at the temple during the Moed. 70 is a number that represents the nations. Israel went down to Egypt 70 in number, and the nations were divided according to that number. And that's from Esther's Mysteries Behind the Mask by Dr. Alwine. I encourage you to get it. It's going to really open up a lot of great treasures to do so, and it's not a very long little workbook to go through. So what about Mordecai? His name is also pagan. I told you earlier that it's associated with Marduk, which is a Babylonian god. But in the Agadah, Mordecai's name is interpreted to mean pure myrrh. Mur, for myrrh, which is related to mar, which is bitterness, because myrrh is bitter to the taste. But also, Decai is pure. So they associate him with one that is refined and noble, like pure myrrh. So notice you have Esther being a myrtle tree, and now we're seeing Mordecai as myrrh. And actually, if you really think about it, those two are picturing Passover and Sukkot, the bookend festivals of the Big Seven. So what about King Ahasuerus, or a King Ahasuerus, which is how it's pronounced in Hebrew? His name actually appears 30 times in the book of Esther, but one time it is spelled oddly, differently. And that's in the very last chapter, chapter 10, in verse 1. So there are two vavs missing from his name in that last chapter, which makes his name spell something more like Chodesh. And for those of you that know a little Hebrew, Ach is brother, Chodesh is a root. Think of a tree again. So we have Ahasuerus, that is Ahasuerus. Something has changed in the king, and I encourage you to look at the website randomgroovybiblefacts.com, because he was the one that brought this out. I never knew this about Ahasuerus. So what's different about the king in this setting in this last chapter. I want you to just think about, from the beginning of the story to the end, something is different with the king. At first, he is not a friend of the Jews. He allows Haman to make an edict that basically is going to commit genocide and just wipe them all out. But he marries a Jewish princess, or a Jewish queen, I should say, with Esther. And after that, she reveals who she is, and she reveals her people, and he realizes it's Mordecai that has saved his life. The king's tune changes. He has a heart change. And although the original edict has went out, he allows, remember, Esther and Mordecai to make new edicts so that the Jews can defend themselves. So essentially, by the time you get to this last chapter, King Ahasuerus, or Ahasuerus, has changed. His heart has changed. Now he is a brother to the root. He's been grafted in, so to speak, to the root. So that's very, very interesting with him. But what about Haman? What does Haman have to do with trees? In Genesis 3:11 it says, and he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" Now, interestingly, this phrase, "from the tree," is Hamin ha'etz in Hebrew. Hamin is a He, a Mem, and a Nun, and it's spelled identically to Haman. So the first time we see the letters that form Haman's name together is in this verse in Genesis, from the tree. And notice, what tree is Adonai speaking about? Obviously, he's talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so we see a relationship with Haman and that negative tree, the forbidden tree. But also, we have Haman. Remember, he hates Mordecai so badly that he builds gallows in which he plans to hang Mordecai from. Now, that gallows is often translated gallows, but in Hebrew, it is eitz. What he really wants to hang Mordecai from is a tree. I mean, yes, it's a lopped off tree, a pole. In Esther 5:14, it says, "And Zeresh, his wife, said to him and all his friends, 'Let him prepare a tree in height 50 cubits, and in the morning speak to the king, and they hang Mordecai on it. And go thou with the king into the banquet, rejoicing. And the thing is good before Haman, and he prepareth the tree.'" And that's from Young's literal translation, because most Jews translate that as gallows. But notice, the very thing that Haman wants to hang Mordecai from, he eventually is hung on himself. So Haman is connected to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the mystics actually in Judaism call the tree of the knowledge of good and evil the tree of doubt. And I find this fascinating because the Hebrew word for doubt, sufek, and the word Amalek, of which Haman derives from, share the same numerical value in gematria of 240. So on a mystical level, Haman is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He is Esau. He is Edom. He is Agag. He is Gog. He is Amalek. So like the forbidden tree from the very beginning in the garden, fear. Remember, what was their first emotion after they ate from it? Fear. They were afraid. So the forbidden tree produces fear and doubt that is masked by a veneer of pride. That's the fruit. That's the fruit when we see it on the outside. That's the fruit that we need to constantly be looking for here, because we are not immune to it by any means. So also in the book of Esther, we do not see the most holy name of God, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name, the Yod He Vav He, in the book of Esther. However, in acrostic form, his name appears hidden at least 4 different times. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. In Esther 1, it says, "He v'kol hanashim yitnu." Translated, that means it and all the women will give. Well, Hebrews read right to left. And here we have the most holy of name of God. If we look at the first letter of each of these words, you see the Yod He Vav He. It's backwards, at least in Hebrew. Here's another one, Esther 5:4. "Yavo Hamelech v'Haman hayom," and let the king and Haman come today. And in this case, if we look at the first letter of each one of these Hebrew words, you see it's from right to left. You see it's spelled appropriately, or according to Hebrew, it's going the right direction. Yod He Vav He. And there's other instances, and you can do a search for that. Joseph Good has a great book called Prophecies in the Book of Esther, and he does cover these, and I encourage you to get that one too. So what about the name? We're looking at names. We looked at Esther, the myrtle. We've looked at Mordecai, the myrrh. We've looked at Ahasuerus, the root. We've looked at Haman, the tree. But what about the festival itself? Pur, from lots, Purim. Well, we know that there was lots cast, and that's what we see the naming of the festival is named after. We see that in Esther 9, 25 and 26, where it says, "But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows," the tree. "Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Pur, which is lot. And because of the instructions in this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them." Now, what is very interesting is if we look at the Aramaic version of the same passage, and I'm reading from George Lamsa's translation of the Holy Bible, same exact passage, and I want you to notice the difference. "When Esther came before the king, the scribe would say, 'Let the wicked plots which were devised against the Jews return upon the head of him who had devised them, and let him and his sons be hanged on the gallows,' the tree." Now this is verse 26 is the difference. "Therefore they called these days Poreye," Hebrew, Purim, "after the name Passover." That is just amazing, because obviously the Aramaic would have been a later version than the Hebrew. And so like the Targumim, or the Targums, like of Jonathan and stuff, we see almost explanations in the text when we go to look at these things. And so you see that they were associating Purim with Passover. Remember, the whole book of Esther begins in that Passover week. What does Purim have to do with the Moedim? The Moedim, of course, are those festivals, the big seven that are given in Leviticus 23. And a lot of people have a problem with Purim because it was instituted by the people. But let's look at some connections to those Moedim. What is being taught to us through celebrating this festival of the people? So we know the main story in Esther took place during that week of Passover. Haman cast lots to set a date for the destruction of the Jews on the 13th of Nisan. The third day, when Esther went in to see the king, would have been Nisan the 15th, which is the first day of unleavened bread, of course. So instead of celebrating Passover, we have the Jews fasting during Passover at that year. Both Passover and Purim occurred outside the land, in foreign lands, Egypt and Persia. Both involved the near extermination of the people of Israel. Both Moses and Esther had to appear before foreign governments, foreign kings, in order to rescue their people. Both Pharaoh's army and Haman and his sons perished on account of their plots against Adonai's people. And the judgment that was upon them was a perfect midah keneged midah, which means a measure for measure. Pharaoh drowned in the water just like the Hebrew babies he sentenced to death. Haman hung by the very gallows on the tree he had prepared for Mordecai. In Proverbs 26 through 27, it says, "Though his hatred covers itself with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly." The man of sin, he's going to be revealed before the assembly. Verse 27, "He who digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls, galal," related to our Megillah word, "a stone, it will come back on him." Oh, beloved, if you've been laying traps for people, digging pits and putting stumbling blocks in front of them, you better be very, very, very careful, because the very trap you set, you may fall into it yourself. Adonai is warring with Amalek in every generation. And you don't have to look at your neighbor to find Amalek. Amalek, Esau is right here. So, as surely as Purim and Passover are connected, so all things in history, all things, are moving us toward the day and the redemption of Messiah. So, what about wine? The wine of Purim. Do we see wine with any of the Moedim? We certainly do. In Eruvim 65a, it says, when wine goes in, the secrets come out. So the Torah is said to have 70 faces. And what do the rabbis mean by that? They mean there are many facets to his truth. Like a diamond, there are many, many sides, right? Cuts that will reflect the light just right in the light. The word for wine in Hebrew is yayin, and it equals 70, as does the word sod, which means secret or hidden. So wine is the perfect symbol for the concealed and the revealed theme in the book of Esther. And notice there's a lot of wine imbibing going on in that book. Wine can cause secrets to be revealed, or true motives, or pain to be suppressed or hidden. So it's a contronym. In that way, it's both a concealer or a revealer. It depends on the context. It can depict joy and gladness and celebrating the festivals, right? Rejoicing. But it can also represent drunkenness, dulled senses, not being sober-minded. So wine can represent judgment, blood, wrath, but it can also represent covenant, like with the blood of the lamb. So it's always one or the other, the contronym, and how it's going to react in us is what is meant to come forward. So you have Passover that has 4 cups of wine that is revealing Adonai's taking Israel as his people. You see judgment involved with the redemption. Judgment and redemption go hand in hand. The man of sin must be judged. Esau must be destroyed. Sukkot, by the time we get there, which is the wedding feast, it's the grape harvest, which is where wine comes from. We see the theme of joy, just like we do with the month of Adar. There's joy, wine, rejoicing. We see in gathering. And at Purim, we see all these themes sort of hidden and interwoven in a concealed and revealed way. So Esther has both the bookend festivals in there if we're willing to look. So I want you to consider the 2 wine banquets that she initiated and invited King Ahasuerus and Haman to. In the first wine banquet, she keeps her true identity concealed, much like Yeshua did with Passover. And at the second banquet, she reveals herself to the king, and at the same time reveals who Haman really is. That's like the end of days, the fall feast, Sukkot. So we see this activity mirrored even in the life of Joseph. And if you want to learn more about that, get Dr. Elwine's Esther's Mysteries Behind the Mask. So at their first reunion in the story of Joseph, when he's reunited with his brothers, he keeps his identity hidden. But he does provide them with grain, life. So you can see Passover in that situation. But during their second visit, only when all the tribes were present, including his brother Benjamin, which is the tribe of Esther and Mordecai, did Joseph reveal himself to his brothers, which is like a Sukkot and in gathering a reunion. Remember, they wept upon one another's shoulders. So do you think that this is like the first and second coming of Yeshua? I do. At his first coming, right, his identity remained mostly concealed. But at his second coming, every knee will bow. We also see Purim connected to Yom Kippurim. Purim, Kippurim. You can probably hear what I'm about to tell you here. Yom Kippurim can be translated as Kippurim, like Purim, a day like Purim. As a matter of fact, the Talmud states that in the future, all holidays will fall into disuse with the exception of Purim. And you may find that just outlandish. However, just in preparing for this lesson, I don't know how many years I've done Purim now. I'd have to count them up. But it is absolutely mind-boggling how many things in Purim are connected to everything else in your Bible in a hidden way. It's like you have to, it's not going to be on the surface. It's not going to be outright in your face. And that's the beauty of it and the irony of the whole thing. You know, things are not always what they seem. And I was just telling my husband last night, I was like, you know, there's so much that I want to bring out. There's so much that I want to say. And I'm trying to streamline it, because what I do know is that every time I make the circuit, every time you make a new circuit on the feast calendar, even including Hanukkah and Purim with the Feast of the People, every time there is something new unveiled. There is something new revealed. It is just like the Megillah, the revealing, the revelation, the Hitgalut. But if you're not participating, nothing is going to be unveiled to you. So, on Yom Kippurim, we prepare for the fast by having a feast beforehand. And on Purim, we prepare by having a fast before we feast. It's like those opposites, sort of like a play on the word. So here's the difference. You go from fasting to feasting, solemnness to joy, weeping to dancing. I mean, there's similarities, yet there's differences. So if the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end, and Purim is both the end of the religious festival cycle of the year and the beginning, which is a picture of fullness. So if you want to kind of understand this better, maybe go and just highlight every time you see sevens in the book of Esther and the context there. It's revealing. So together as male and female, you have Mordecai and Esther as a picture of the Holy Spirit. What are they doing? They are preserving and saving the people of Adonai in the midst of spiritual darkness. In Egypt, of Persia, of Babylon, doesn't matter where the setting is, the picture's the same. So as a result, though, and this is always the result, and this is what is so cool about the whole thing, the fullness of the hidden nations come out with them. In Esther 8, verse 17, it talks about, and many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Why? Because they saw the reality of who the God of Mordecai and Esther were. So what are we wrestling with? Let's get back to, let's sort of end with the warfare and the themes of the month. Things are not always what they seem. Be careful how you judge other people's actions. And this is true all year, but especially right now. God works through the natural creation. Trust that he is even in the so-called coincidence and happenstances of your life. That's what Esther teaches us. In order to see major plot reversals in your life, you're going to have to be like Esther and say, if I perish, I perish. Every time we finally get to that point, to we're like, I don't care, Adonai, take it all. If I die, I die. If I'm lost, I'm lost. And then suddenly, finally, whatever it is, he makes available to us. It's difficult, though, to receive counsel from others, especially when the outlook or what they're telling us is painful and it's contrary to our desires. And remember, Esau is the one that is ruled by desire. And the desire can be good, guys, and this is what's so tricky. Our desires can be a good, godly thing, but yet if they are what rule our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, they will lead us down the path of Esau and Amalek every single time. We have to be very careful. So I thought, well, what we need to do is check our mask. Are we hiding something? Are we hiding something from Adonai? Are we hiding something from other people? Or is our obedience simply outward? Is it just a mask? Is it just a garment that we've put on? So, or has Adonai been trying to unveil something in you? Remember, this goes back to that birthing aspect, that potential we talked about last month. Because remember, these are like one big long month. Is he trying to unveil you and you're refusing? Are you scared? Are you doubting? Matthew 10:26 says, therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. It's going to be revealed. It's going to come out. And the Mazel, the Dagim, the Pisces, mirrors this hidden, below the surface, deeply concealed issues that we're dealing with in warfare here. So how is your joy? You remember that was one of the big things for this month. Joy. Our joy should be increasing in Adar. And the sense is laughter. Are we having trouble finding joy? Are we having trouble finding laughter? I know several families that have been deeply affected by great loss that are mourning and grieving. And I'm not talking to them, but I am talking to the majority of us that are still dealing with a lack of joy or laughter. And the problem is, we like to point our fingers out, but the problem is there's something going on here. We're warring with Amalek, Esau. So, are you unhappy? Are you depressed? Frustrated? Angry? Does it seem like Hashem's against you? Does it seem like other people are against you? Is it difficult to rejoice in the triumphs and blessings of other people? Do we struggle with that? Do we have a little green monster sometimes that wants to rear its head because we feel like Adonai is doting on them, is being unfair to us? Are we struggling with doubt like Amalek? Remember, that's what his name means. So I encourage you to stop looking at your neighbor and thinking all this stuff is, oh yeah, it's them. Because you know what? God knows they are in your life. He knows what's happening. He's placed them there for a reason, for divine intervention. It is all about getting you to be where you should be. So don't look at your neighbor. Look at yourself. A lack of joy and even many types of depression are a direct result of ungratefulness. Maybe we need to start counting our blessings. Count those skulls. Count those heads around you. Doubting that Adonai knows what's best for you, that's a lack of trust, by the way, leads to envy, and it leads to coveting. Coveting what your neighbor has. It can be their marriage. It can be their children. It can be because you view them as happy. It can be their beauty. It can be their glory. It can be their gifts and their talents. Coveting is the first sin, guys. So it's got its fingers in everything. So if we are doubting Adonai and we're doubting other people, we might need to do a heart check on what's going on in here. Review the problems that plagued Esau, Amalek, Agag, Haman, because they are our problems too. And all of this end junk that needs to be revealed so that we can repent and move forward is a preparation for Passover. And that's where we are, the prep for Passover. So I'm going to leave you with one last passage, and it is from 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 9. And Paul says, but realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. This is true on the cycles every year, both poles. After Sukkot, right here at Adar, right before Purim. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable. Do we have irreconcilable differences with people? Malicious gossips. Are we running our big fat mouth and our tongues? Without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. Now, beloved, this is me speaking now. Don't define yourself outside of this. Look into your own heart and ask Adonai where these things are in your heart. This is like starting to get that leaven cleaned out of your house. Verse 6, for among them are those who enter into households and captivate weak women, and that's not just women, that's just anyone of weak faith, weighed down with sins, led by various impulses. Notice the lust, the desires, they get you in trouble. Always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also opposed truth. Men of depraved mind rejected in regard to the faith. And who is Jannes and Jambres and the Targum Jonathan? Actually, that's what the names of the magicians are given. It's these names. But they will not make further progress, for their folly will be obvious to all, revealed. What's concealed will be revealed, just as Jannes and Jambres' folly was also. So, I pray that this month is a month of preparation, a preparation for the heart. I pray that you're like Naphtali. I pray that you have hinds feet that are let loose and sent to give good words. I pray that as Adonai allows you to experience the struggles and the trials, whether it be people or circumstances, whatever it is, I pray that you will allow him to tenderly remove the things from your heart that need to be removed so that we can worship him in purity and in truth. And these are the things of the last days. We need to utterly destroy Amalek, utterly destroy that Esau within. And we can only do that by being completely vulnerable and open to Adonai. Allow him to do this work. Be like Esther and say, if I perish, I perish. Because really what needs to perish is simply Amalek and Esau. And I pray that you will allow him to do that. Meanwhile, block out the name of Haman. Shalom.